What spokesman Anthony Albanese joins us now from Canberra. Anthony Albanese, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Virginia.
You've had time overnight to look a little more closely at what the government's proposing. Is the opposition still saying it's going to oppose this?
Absolutely. You don't save Qantas by flogging it off. What they are proposing is a wholesale getting rid of everything in the Act that makes Qantas an Australian airline. Getting rid of the provisions, not just for ownership, but that it be based here, that its headquarters are here, that the two-thirds majority of the board have to be Australian, that a majority of its activity in terms of maintenance and catering and its activities have to be based here. What they're essentially saying is that it's okay just for those jobs to go overseas.
But if you oppose this, if you don't support this, how then is Qantas and all those jobs, how are they supposed to survive?
Well, listen to what Qantas have been saying, Virginia. Qantas themselves have been saying that the Sale Act is not the major issue, that they wanted a debt guarantee. Now, why is that the case? This argument about equal playing field needs to be addressed. The fact is that Virgin have access to capital from a Singapore government-backed airline, from a UAE-backed airline and from a New Zealand government-backed airline. They have that in place right now. What Qantas is saying is that in order to compete, they're not asking for any money from the taxpayer. All they have asked for, and what the government indicated over recent months, was they were going to support the debt guarantee. Joe Hockey outlined the conditions and said they had all been met. So that was factored in by Qantas management, by the workforce, and importantly as well by its shareholders. And then at the last minute, last Thursday, the government decided to go on this ideological free market crusade. The aviation sector internationally is a very regulated sector. That makes sense when you think about it. You don't want planes doing what they want when they want. By definition, there is government intervention in the aviation sector. 8 of the 10 world's largest airlines are government-backed airlines.
All right, well, just to jump in there, though, I mean, you're backing Qantas's calls for a debt guarantee. We've heard from Joe Hockey that as a treasurer, he can't countenance that. He can't countenance the idea of burdening the Australian public with exposure to potentially $6 to $7 billion worth of debt. Are you saying that if you were in government, you would be comfortable with exposing Australian taxpayers to that debt?
Well, that's an absurd figure, Virginia, that he must have made up over breakfast, because that's not what we're talking about here. What Qantas was seeking was not any payment from the taxpayer.
No,
they
not,
were seeking
not
essentially,
the payment, but
essentially standing by. The figure is nothing like $6 to $7 billion has never been mentioned by Qantas. They're not about to buy that many new aircraft. If you look at the restructuring that they did last Thursday, it was about foregoing the potential purchase or leasing of aircraft that they had foreshadowed previously. Joe Hockey himself said that this was important. Joe Hockey himself has to explain really why the position's changed. Warren Truss, as the Transport Minister, when he was the Shadow Transport Minister, was out there opposing any lifting at all, even of the limited restrictions, the 35-25 rule, which is the amount of capital that can be owned by an individual shareholder or by an airline. He opposed that and said that would run a risk of a threat to the Australian national interest, and also particularly have an impact on regional Australia.
All right, look, I want to get to that 25-35 matter in just a moment, because I know it's something that you dealt with back in 2009. But let's be realistic here for a moment. The government is not coming through with the debt guarantee. You're going to oppose what the government has proposed. So what on earth does Qantas do in the meantime? Overnight they've said, you need to help us now. So what happens to this company?
Well, the government had indicated very clearly that they would be helping. Last night they made a decision after, interestingly, everyone in their cabinet spoke and had different views very clearly. That shows how controversial this issue has been within the government. It's about time that the government stopped playing politics with every single issue. Yesterday, they were out there having the absurd argument that this was all about the carbon price. That was their response during the whole of question time. Qantas repudiated that. Indeed, it is a fact, Virginia, that Qantas and Virgin voluntarily asked to be included in the scheme.
All right, I do want to return to that question though, because they're the government, but you have a role to play in this as well, as do the Greens, in dealing with legislation that comes before the House and comes before the Senate. What role do you propose to play now in making sure that Qantas survives if there's this standoff between two positions in politics?
Virginia, we are taking the position that we said we would take last week and last month and last year. The government, having told the markets that they would take a different position, have backflipped and have said, no, we won't do that. We'll just go to this ideological crusade, pretending that the aviation sector is this free market operation globally, and that Qantas, essentially, it's okay for Qantas to send jobs overseas.
Well, look, let's stick
that
with,
is what they have
that
argued very explicitly.
Let me just jump in there, because let's stick with that. Now, time is tight. This morning, Anthony Albanese, Virgin is majority foreign owned, and yet there's thousands of Virgin jobs here in Australia. So if you're concerned about jobs staying in Australia, foreign investment doesn't necessarily change that.
It does, Virginia, if you move maintenance overseas. It does if you move your head office overseas. It does if you move your focus from being an Australian national airline into an international airline. That changes
well, the international
whole
division would, of course, stay that way.
Well, because it has to, Virginia. That's the belling of the cat here. Having not noticed that is a fact, that the whole international aviation regime is based upon air services agreements between government to government, based upon the location of those airlines, is a real indication something should have registered with government cabinet members last night that the basis of aviation is national interest. That's what occurs around the world. Australia is saying we'll give up our national interest. We won't worry about having a national airline. And previously, people such as Warren Truss have argued that that is indeed essential for a whole range of reasons. It's essential for other countries.
Okay.
But for us as an island continent, it is more important than countries that have land transport borders.
Just one more on this, and then a couple I want to get to on a couple of other subjects, Anthony Albanese. Let's go back to that issue we raised earlier. In 2009, of course, you proposed changing the single investor rule and the foreign airline investor rule. So is this now, for you, for the opposition, a matter of percentage negotiation between you and the government? Just what lifting of the ceiling you're prepared to go through, or is it absolute?
No, not at all. We proposed that because when we had an aviation white paper, we had proper decision-making processes. We had a green paper and a white paper. It took place over a year. There were consultative forums with the sector, with industry, with the community participation in that. And what that came down with was a recommendation that to maintain the 51% majority Australian ownership, but that the 25-35 provisions weren't essential.
Yes, indeed. But my question this morning goes to whether now your position, the opposition's position, is absolute, or whether it's now just a matter of negotiations around the percentage ceiling.
No, we would be prepared to consider that 25-35 proposition if the government had a proposition for us to consider. We have said this throughout, since December 6 was the Qantas downgrade. Since then, I have said we will be constructive. I put up a number of options. There are other options besides a debt guarantee. There would be an equity injection. It was one option. The government indicated that it was going to go down the debt guarantee path. Therefore, in order to be constructive, we indicated that we'd be supportive of that. And now the government withdraws its position and says we're not being constructive. I mean, give me a break. They have been playing games and politics with the employment prospects of Australians, not just who work directly for Qantas, but those who work in the tourism sector, the freight and logistics sector, and they've been playing politics rather than actually acting like a government.
I just quickly want to touch on Manus Island, given your former leader, the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, was the author of the Manus Island detention solution. Are you feeling any personal disquiet now that it was your government that created a place that is clearly, manifestly unsafe?
I feel disquiet about the whole of asylum seeker policy in terms of it's not easy, Virginia. I think anyone who pretends that there's an easy answer to this, my position is the same as it was in government. Am I comfortable with everything that happens in immigration? I would be amazed if anyone who dealt with these complex issues was. These are difficult issues. There is the issue of stopping drownings at sea. That is vital. There's also a need to make sure that we give proper respect to the dignity of people who are involved in seeking asylum.
And is Australia doing that with the Manus Island solution?
Oh, look, the fact is, Virginia, there aren't easy options here, and what we need to do is to make sure...
No one's saying easy. How about safe?
What we need to do, Virginia, is to make sure that there's transparency here. What is extraordinary is the way that people are finding out more off Indonesian newspapers or reports from overseas than they are off their own government. And I believe in the long term that is unsustainable, that it's appropriate that Scott Morrison and the government actually let the Australian people know exactly what is going on.
We'll have to leave it there. Anthony Albanese, thank you.
Thank you.